Good evening and welcome to Footy Furnace. There's almost 20 players who want to find new clubs over the next 3 days, and tonight we'll get stuck into each and every one of them. Damien Barrett, Jimmy Bartell and Kane Corns, welcome to all three of you. We begin tonight, as we always do, with the Hahn hit list. These are the trade stories that are going to dominate the next 3 days, and no surprise, Damo, Bailey Smith is at the very top of the tree.
Has been there for some time. We'll be there until deadline on Wednesday night, we think, Tom. But we know that Geelong's got pick 17 to get this deal done, and we've known that the Bulldogs have pushed back on that. Let's take a look at the draft order. As it stands, there's going to be some changes on this list you're about to see. But while there's 16 picks before Geelong's first pick, and this is what is on the table for Bailey Smith, the clubs before them, there are only 10 as it stands, and there may well be as few as 9. Fremantle could lose both 10 and 11 as they broker with Richmond for Shea Bolton. There's not many clubs there that immediately jump out off the page that want Bailey Smith, and I don't believe any single club will use the picks that they've got before Geelong in Bailey Smith if he was to be pushed through to the national draft and or pre-season draft. And that is a very real, in fact, strong possibility tonight because of the pushback from the Bulldogs. Surely if the Bulldogs are wanting a top 10 pick, the Cats aren't probably going to do that, but isn't this the whole point of future trading and future picks is the ability to use a multiple array of picks to get the deal done? I wouldn't be surprised by Wednesday. It's going to be that pick 17 and something else.
Pick 17 and something else. So you think the Dogs will fold?
No, I don't think it's a fold.
So Geelong will fold. Geelong, you think the Cats?
I don't think there always has to be a winner and a loser. I think they'll come to terms where both sides are happy. But you throw in a pick, and there's always a pick coming back, and I think they'll land in a good place. Well, the point is, though, Jimmy, they don't need to. Pick 17 will get it done, be it by Wednesday night or when the draft comes around and they use that pick. Yeah, I just think there'll be a compromise before any of that.
Kane, you're massive on clubs being too nice. Why don't Geelong just walk in with the pre-season draft?
I don't know, Tom. I'm just listening to Damo there and looking through the graphic and going, why is everyone so nice to each other? Like, this is a game of 1%ers. We saw how even the competition was this year. Why don't Geelong just do that? Just say, OK, don't worry about it. The pick is off. The Western Bulldogs will come crawling back come Wednesday as it gets towards deadline day, and they'll have their hand out for that pick 17. But Geelong should just do that. I mean, Paul Connors is powerful. He's done it before. It's very rare, and I don't think it'll personally get to that. But clubs should do it more often. This is an industry that has just become too friendly, where everyone's looking after player managers. Everyone doesn't want to offend anyone. Everyone's talking about, oh, we're respectful. He's a contracted player. Rubbish. You're in it to win it. And I think the nasty edge has got to come back. I'm starting to see it a little bit with Hawthorn, which I love, and we'll get to that later on. But if I'm Geelong, just hold firm at 17 or he goes through the draft.
And we might see this nasty edge, or this strong edge, probably is the best way to put it, with Port Adelaide and Dan Houston, who's got 3 years remaining on a contract. There's no doubt, Damo, that Port would prefer Dan Houston to get to North Melbourne because that is where the best deal is. Dan Houston, at this point in time, doesn't want to play for North Melbourne. He wants to play for Collingwood. It appears Carlton is out of the race, but this is going to go very deep in the trade period as well. Yeah, well, too. And Carlton's got its own decisions to make internally. There are strong people at that footy club who want to use 12 or 14 on the Dan Houston possibility. Equally, there's others who want to take both those picks into what they know to be a really, really strong draft. I still feel he will get to Carlton. That's my take on this. He's going to get to Carlton? I still feel he will get to Carlton. How's he going to get there with the pick?
I think they might budge on the 14.
So you think Carlton will give... But that might not be enough for Port Adelaide.
Yeah, but it might be as well.
Yeah.
Or 12.
Yeah, OK. Because Port have been strong in the fact they want 2 first-round picks or 1 pick in the top 10. Carlton can't satisfy them with either. But when they say that they're happy for him to walk back, they've also been happy for him to have the narrative for 6 weeks that he's happy to go out. And he's not going back right now in his own mind. And I know that's the holding position publicly with his contract, but that's where it lies right now. What about the Collingwood Football Club and where they're at? Because they've been trying to satisfy Port for the best part of a week with Dan Houston. And I can tell you tonight, they are nowhere near being able to satisfy Port for Dan Houston. They are a long way apart, to the point now where you're talking about Carlton. North Melbourne still believe they're in the mix for Dan Houston because Justin Leppich and the Pies are nowhere near it. Yeah, well, let's take a listen to what Justin Leppich said during the course of trade period. Now, he's trying to have a bet each way here when he says he's dealing with the now and the future.
I guess it's the sort of thing as a club we have to know where our limits are and stick to those because, as we all know, we've got a job to do in looking after the now, but we can't let it cost our future. And I'm really conscious of that we can't give up enough, that we also leave ourselves high and dry going forward.
Yeah, that surprises me a little bit because I think every move that they have done is for the now. Nothing really that they've done recently has been for the future, and that's the way they're behaving now. But Jimmy, I'm interested in everyone being on the same page, like from the coach to the list manager to the board, in terms of where you're at right now. For me, that's the most important thing, and I'm just not sure Collingwood collectively know whether they're challenging next year or whether they want to half challenge next year and challenge in 3 years. Your view on how important it is to be on the same page.
Yeah, it's a fascinating point, Kane, because clearly you'd have a football committee and that's normally led by your football manager. And we know Collingwood is without a football manager and it looks like Justin Leppage is taking charge. That's normally chaired by your chairman or someone with some football nous on your board. So I don't know who's sitting where for Collingwood at the moment. And then you want to go in and have those robust discussions. You even highlighted with Carlton. I know we're talking about Collingwood with Carlton with half of them wanting Dan Houston, half of them wanting to go to the draft. That's where you get into some real issues. And I think Collingwood might be going through that debate. And as you mentioned, they have pushed the chips in. They've gone and got Perryman. They went and got Schultz last year. They think they're still in striking distance of a flag next year, and you can't argue with some of those things. I
feel they're in a state of unrest. I mean, Jeff Brown has now announced he's not renewing his time as president of the Footy Club. We know that Craig Kelly's got his own issues as CEO, and the dynamic of Brendan Bolton and Justin Leppich, it just did not work this year as a relationship exercise once Graham Wright exited the club. Claire Pettifor was there for a period of time as well. That didn't work either. She's no longer there. So they've got big decisions to make. You reported that Frank Panisi from the Melbourne Storm, Craig Bellamy's right-hand man, is a person of interest. Justin Reid, through his past connections with Craig Kelly in sports management, is also a person who may be considered. But there's a massive hole there, and it's not obviously going to be easily filled. Yeah,
it's difficult, isn't it? Especially when you've got that chasm in your footy department that's been existing now for close to a year. Just before we move off the Pies, Port Adelaide. So Ivan Soldo has wanted to get to St Kilda. He requested a trade to the Saints, and today St Kilda moved away from Ivan Soldo. Now, he didn't officially fail this medical that he had, but the Saints were taking a conservative approach on that 3-year deal because of his past knee injury. So that's a concern. The other one is Joe Richards, Kane. I believe he's going to get to Port regardless. They'll walk into the pre-season draft. If Collingwood ask for any more than a future third rounder or a third rounder this year, Port will say no thanks and they'll walk him. And that's the sort of toughness that I imagine you'd want.
Yeah, but just on Ivan Soldo, the Saints have dodged a bullet here. So not only are they worried about the knee, they'd have to be worried about his character. And I know with your breaking story today that you reported that they're happy to have him back. I'm not certain of that. And certainly Ivan doesn't want to go back. He's got to really look at the way he's carried himself at Port Adelaide and the character that he is. Certainly there's questions whether he fits into a team environment at a football club. He didn't go to the best and fairest. He came to be the number one ruckman, but he was superseded by Jordan Sweet. So the minute it got a little bit too hard, he wanted out. And he wanted out before he had a destination that was confirmed. Didn't go to the best and fairest, and the way that he's been carrying himself. So certainly one of the more disappointing recruits Port Adelaide have ever had. And I'd be worried for his career and the way he's accepted back into the team environment at Port Adelaide.
Well, don't rule out Ivan Soldo going to a club that isn't St Kilda or Port Adelaide, a club that needs a second ruck. But I think this is quite nuanced, Kane. I agree. He doesn't want to live in Adelaide. He never wanted to be at Port Adelaide after the first day he entered the club. And now it's a matter of finding him a new home on that multi-year deal.
Sorry, Tom, to jump in, but going off the back of Kane's point there, if you're a club, you're not fighting over him coming in. There's plenty of rucks in second-tier competition who do anything to play. So as Kane's highlighting,
that's the point, Jimmy. There's players that would fight and scrap. I watch Riley O'Brien play from Adelaide. He fights and scraps every week and does everything he can. Why doesn't a club try and go and get him who was dropped from Adelaide? There's plenty of rucks out there. We saw what Lloyd Meek did for Hawthorn this year. Just make the most of every opportunity. You've got a guy who just thought he was going to walk into the number one ruck role. If I'm a club, I wouldn't go anywhere near Ivan Soldo, and he can go back to Port Adelaide, but I'd be worried about the direction that his career takes from here.
Can we move on to Melbourne Football Club? They led the show last week. They've been in the news all week for a variety of different reasons, and it is a mess down there because they haven't been aligned for a while now. We know Christian Petrarca, if he had it his way, would still leave now if he could. We know Clayton Oliver wants to get out. They've got an interim president in many regards, Brad Green, who is a part of this review. Kane, what have you made of what you've seen off the field for the D's recently?
Yeah, I guess I've got to pick up Brad Green here. This is the 3OW story from Matthew Lloyd where Clayton Oliver has cleaned out his locker, and Brad went to Twitter pretty quickly and sort of made light out of this fact. But I mean, Brad is doing a lot of fan-like behaviour, and I don't know whether he's got ambitions to be the president full-time or whether he's just a caretaker, but he's just a fan, Brad Green. He's too emotional, and you can look back through some of the tweets. He's very active on social media. How about you actually deal with the mess that is your football club right now, rather than spruiking on Twitter every time there's a story that is unfavourable towards the Melbourne Football Club? And some of his stuff has been quite disrespectful, I think. And
that's
Brad himself was on
long season for the
exactly
firefighter.
right.
The kid needs a rest. I mean, is this personal, Kane?
Well, I just don't like the way he carries himself. Like, what other leaders of football clubs do you see carrying on like that? Not many. And Brad himself's got to ask him the question and the rest of his board mates as to why they signed off on the most ridiculous long-term contract we've ever seen. So that deal for Clayton Oliver, which you're telling me is 1.3 a season, was signed off by this board right there, which Brad was a part of. So this mess wouldn't have happened if the board actually knew what they were doing and just said, and why would we sign a player on that length of term with the history that he's had, and then we wouldn't be in this mess. So I think he's got to worry about the footy club, the culture of it, more so than making light-hearted jabs on Twitter repeatedly.
There's just a disconnect at every level of that footy club. Darren Shand, as we know, has been brought in as an outside consultant, formerly of the All Blacks, the mighty All Blacks, to have a look at this club. And we're hearing that this review has just about been completed and will be brought into the public domain in some form as soon as this week. Now, I just don't have a way of believing that Gary Pert can survive a type of review if it was going to be warts and all with someone like a Darren Shand involved in it, given that, as you said, Tom, you've got Clayton Oliver and Christian Petrarca, two of their best players in the history of the game in the past month, 2 months, wanting to leave the football club by choice. And now you've still got Gary Pert there. You've got, as Kane's saying, the interim chair, and yet to be determined whether he wants to even stay there. As Jeff Chapman, again, wants to come in from outside the operation. Stephen Smith's another name. While all this is going on, you've got this review that Gary Pert is still part of the operation.
And there's no doubt that if Gary Pert was moved on, that would solve a lot of issues at this football club, both from a playing perspective, but also from a board perspective, because the issue that we're seeing at the moment with Clayton Oliver being shopped around to other clubs, that was Gary Pert, but he's on the review board. That makes it very difficult. I feel sorry for Tim Lamb at the moment. He's a list manager that has put together a premiership list 3 years ago, and now he's being forced to defend his club's culture and make it an attractive proposition. This is what he had to say during the week.
We don't want to be a club that players don't want to come to, so we want to be a really attractive place for players to come to.
Are you attractive at the moment, do you think?
Yeah, it's a good question. Hard to answer. Yep, hard to answer accurately.
Well, the accurate answer is no.
It's easy to answer. Yeah. They're not. And Dan Houston made that decision himself only about a month ago when he was caught up in the blowing up of the whole Christian Petrarca issue at Melbourne Footy Club. He had a line of sight on how that was unfolding at one particular stage in play. So he made his decision there and then. He's out after what he saw Christian Petrarca doing.
And that hurts Port Adelaide as well, because they had 2 first-round picks that were pretty much locked in from Melbourne for Dan Houston. And since that blow-up, Dan Houston's looked elsewhere, and Melbourne miss out on a 2-time All-Australian the last 2 years. Like, that is a tangible effect of instability within your club. Furnace, let's continue the Hahn hit list and get to Richmond, who won 2 games this year. They finished last on the ladder. And last week, Kane, Noah Bolter signed a 7-year contract extension.
He did, Tom. I think you would know my thoughts on this. It's one of the more ridiculous ones I've seen. He's like nearly the 300th best player in the competition. He finished 11th in their best and fairest of a side that won 2 games. That's like finished 20th in Brisbane's best and fairest. But don't listen to me, because I think there's going to be a push from clubs to have the AFL limit the maximum length you can sign a player for. Let's have a listen to the Brisbane footy boss, Danny Daly, and the Sydney coach, John Longmire, just on that.
You sort of probably start at the 4 and 5 mark, but then you get hit with other clubs being willing to offer 6 and 7 years. So you've got to be a bit strategic and careful about holding your ground on the 4 and 5.
I wonder, Danny, whether it would be wise of the AFL to put a cap on it, like the NBA at 5 years. Would you be supportive of that to protect the clubs?
100%. Yeah, 100%. We'd be open to that and willing to be part of that discussion and negotiation.
It's probably something for the AFL to consider. Is there a time limit? Is there a limit on player contracts? Because the reality is it's very difficult to get the clubs to do that, because there's always someone else willing to offer more years.
So the Bolter one was the jump the shark moment for me in terms of the long-term deals and maybe the catalyst for clubs getting together and saying to the AFL, come on, this is getting completely ridiculous. Let's have a look at putting a maximum length on these deals.
Do you think it's palatable to have maximum lengths on deals, Jimmy, in the AFL? Surely clubs would just talk behind the scenes anyway.
Yeah, look, I get where they're going with it. 5 to 6 years seems about right. 7+, then of course you're waiting into areas of that they still are on a high amount when they get into their early 30s. But the thing with Bolter too, he's at the right time, right place, because clearly Richmond are going to be young for quite a considerable amount of time. He's 25, so they don't have much in that bracket. His key position, key forward, key back. So they're probably going where they think the market is going to offer him, and they're just trying to match to keep a player of that age and 100 games experience. Quickly,
is it possible that the AFL does this, Damo, or not?
They love controlling everything and they don't trust the clubs to control themselves. And we'll touch on a moment of that with the trading of future picks in a moment, Tom. But I'd be surprised if the Players Association let them, because it is a restraint of trade if you want to go down that path. Yeah. Legally, if you want to actually go down that legal path.
Gold Coast's first offer for Daniel Rioli was pick 6 and 13 they wanted back from the Gold Coast. So Richmond's first request was 6 and 13 from the Gold Coast Suns. Gold Coast said no. This will go down to the wire, but I think pick 6 will be involved anyway, Damo, which is still a lot for a player like Daniel Rioli, but because he's contracted and he's won the best and fairest this year, albeit in a weak team, the Tigers hold all the cards.
I get why it's going to happen that way, but I feel personally that it's overs for Daniel Rioli, as good as he is. 3-time premiership player, best and fairest this year, and didn't give up like a few teammates this year. So I give all that with Daniel Rioli. But what Richmond is doing, as we know, with that pick 6 coming back in and a couple of really good picks for Shea Bolton going to the Dockers, is just clearly getting ahead of the compromised drafts when the Tassie team comes in. Still expected to be 2028. And there's also a coinciding of next year's draft, next year's trade period, 2025. That will be the first time clubs can trade for the first time picks 2 years in advance. So that will then take in the 2027 draft, which effectively means next year is the starting point to the compromised drafts being affected all other clubs when Tassie comes in.
You also had the element too that they're chopping a lot of points out of the draft because they're trying to get clubs to pay fair value, as a lot of clubs are screaming out for academy and father-son picks. So obviously having multiple picks and then obviously into the future, as Damo is touching on, is important.
So does that mean, Damo, this is just off the top of my head, in 2027, by the time we get to the draft, we'll know who's got what picks, but next year, some picks will be blocked out because Tasmania will be coming in?
Yeah, you'll be able to trade picks into the 2027 system as early as next year, 2025, right. Yeah.
All right,
that's the plan. They've yet to sign off on that, the AFL, but that's what the clubs believe to be in play for 2025.
That will be interesting next year when that does play out. Shea Bolton, his house in Carnegie is on the market. It's up for sale. He's got 4 years left on the deal. It's fairly presumptuous. We all do think this deal is going to get done. It's going to be to the Fremantle Dockers, we think, but it hasn't been done yet. And they've been knocking back deals all over the place, Damo, for this, and Jimmy.
Yeah, well, 10, 11 and 18 are the picks that the Dockers have got. And okay, Kane, you've got, I think, a similar view to me on this one when it comes to Bolton, in that he checked out this year, and I think 10 and 18's overs. I'd be using 10 and 30 for what it's worth.
Yeah, I'm a bit with you, Damo, but I just really like the way that Fremantle are handling themselves. I think they've been really fair, and I think they know where they're going. I think their list has been patient, the build for it. I think they're at a terrific opportunity to really bounce high up. They lost their last 4 games of the season, of course, would have been a different story, but I just wouldn't overpay for him because he has checked out. You can see his numbers there. At times this year, for a player this talented, he was just running around not giving the effort that was required. So Richmond don't want him back. He can't go back. Can you imagine his mindset if he checked out this year, what it would be like next year? So that means Fremantle just got to hold their ground. The offer is fair. We're not going to pay any more because, as you say, that would be paying overs. And I mean, Shea Bolton doesn't want to go back, and if he does go back, it's not going to be a great result for the Tigers, I wouldn't have thought.
Well, I just wanted to highlight, Kane, a couple of players who did have to go back, and we always refer to, you don't want to go back in that environment, but I think players are pretty mature about it, and you've got to actually have some pride in your performance as well, because you don't want to devalue yourself on that year that you do go back. So we've just highlighted some players in recent times who did have to stay because we knew they were trying to get out from their club, but went back and played another year, and some even stayed longer and kept succeeding. Josh Dunkley, of course, look at those averages, and then very good. I think he might have come second in that best and fairest to the Bont. Well, nearly everyone comes second to the Bont, really, in the Bulldogs' best and fairest. Papley, All-Australian. Bryce Gibbs, he didn't go until the following year, but still put up a 4th in the club best and fairest. And Ryan O'Keefe, Damo, had a sensational year in 2008, trying to come back to Victoria, obviously at the end of 2007.
So it is possible to do that. It remains to be seen whether every single player can do it, though. Like Clayton Oliver, I'd be less confident with that alongside those players.
Yeah, of course. It depends on the character of player. We've even looked at now in recent times, we've had an inkling that players are already leaving a club at the start of the year. We think, Danger was always wanting to come back to Geelong. He was sensational his last year. There was always noise around Gaz Jr. and, of course, Buddy Franklin, and their final years were sensational.
How valuable do you think Liam Baker is, Kane? This is one of those situations that bubbles away. West Coast, we know, have picked 3 in the pre-season draft. They want to walk Liam Baker because he's out of contract. But Freo are waiting in the wings, and then they haven't been ruled out simply because West Coast haven't been able to get a deal done yet.
Well, he feels a great need for Fremantle. I mean, because he's so versatile. And, I mean, I think when you look at him, you look at his character as well. Like, terrific character. He's hard, he's courageous, he's had the success. So, works at both clubs. I like him at West Coast. I really like him at Fremantle as well. I mean, and if it was me and I was West Coast, once again, I'd put him through the draft. Like, Richmond aren't going to pick him up. He doesn't want to be there. So, like, test this and test how nasty and aggressive you can be and save your picks for someone else. That's what I'd be doing, but I think that's always a last resort and very unlikely to happen.
Another player on the hard hit list is Tom Barrass as well at West Coast with a couple of years left on a deal. Damo, where's that at?
Still expecting to get to Hawthorn, Tom. I know there was a curveball, and a massive curveball, it must be said, when they traded Hawthorn with Carlton for Carlton's future first and second. So Hawthorn right now have got their own first and second for next year. They've got Carlton's first and second for next year. It'll be up to West Coast whether they want Hawthorn's or Carlton's or a combination of the two in how they now get Tom Barrass off their books to the Hawthorn Footy Club. It'll still happen, Tom, I believe, quite strongly, but just not the way we thought.
I think they'll say no to that deal, but I imagine that deal will get done in some way or form, just maybe not that exact type. It was a courageous move from the Hawks to essentially call the Eagles' bluff, wasn't it? The Hawks trade with Carlton that we speak about, though, was it also interesting because it was a bombshell from nowhere. Like, I don't think anyone saw it coming. It gave Carlton picks 12 and 14 in this year's draft, Jimmy.
Yeah, and Kane, your thoughts, because obviously Carlton have got the father sons, the 2 Camporale boys sitting there. Do you reckon this was a bit of a factor at play?
Yeah, it probably was, Jimmy, but I just like Hawthorn. I just think they're just not sitting around waiting for anyone. They're all on the same page. A little bit what we spoke about at Collingwood on the same page at the Blues. Well, I just reckon Hawthorn are. Maybe they're a year ahead of where they thought they would be, so they adjust their plan, go and get the experienced players. If it's not happening in one other club, we'll go a different direction. There's still 3 days to go. So at least they're doing things and they're aggressive. You look at the strategy behind it, only they would know what their grand plan would be, but they're making moves, they're making things happen because they're in a hurry. Their young group is in a hurry. And look, I'm really excited of what they can achieve next year with this playing list, which will look pretty strong at the end of this trade period.
Yeah, and the Carlton 12 and 14 picks that they've now got, 69, 72 and 73 beyond that. There's every chance that 69, 72, 73 packaged up will maybe enough for the biddings on the Camporale twins. I mean, it could be as far back as the 3rd round.
And they are trying to move up 12 and 14 to pick 3 as well, but at the moment the West Coast Eagles are saying no to that.